Hi, I'm JB Jones,
And I'm Bella Naiman.
and welcome to Jewelry Week 2022. We're so excited to have you guys here. This is our virtual program, lives on YouTube. Check out all the other amazing programs there. And also head to our website, NYCJewelryWeek.com, to see everything else we're doing. And I'm going to let Bella tell you about what's coming up next.
Today we are going to be enjoying a program from eminent journalist and storyteller Visha Goyal Sikri. She will share exclusive preview of her upcoming book that has taken her 2 years of research, and she's being joined by gemologist, miner, and merchant Chris Johnson from Namibia. So we hope you enjoy this program. And while it's not live, if you have any questions, please do include them in the chat because we can always forward them later on to the host. Thanks so much. Bye.
Right. Good evening. My name is Richa and I'm joining you from Singapore. I'm a journalist and a storyteller in the gems and jewelry and diamonds industry. And with me today is Chris Johnston, who's joining us from Namibia. And welcome, Chris.
Nice to be here.
So a quick introduction about me, and then I introduce Chris. Like I said, I'm a journalist and storyteller, and the reason why we're here today is because for the last 2.5 years, I've been writing a book. It was commissioned in 2020 by a mining and marketing company called Gemfields. It's a collection of short adventure stories, and each story is based on actual events and a real individual like Chris over here, and their experiences related to colored gemstones from Africa. So here we are today to give you a sneak peek. The book is going to be published, is due for publication end of April, May, fingers crossed, and it's going to be available on Amazon and all those amazing distribution channels. So we're here to give you a sneak peek into what this book is about, and through that we are going to talk about colored gemstones. And coming to Chris now, Chris here, we were introduced because I was looking for people whose experiences I could document in this book, and someone said, you got to talk to Chris Johnston. He's this crazy guy living in Namibia who's had all these wonderful adventures. And I said, right, let's do it. So Chris has been living in Namibia. He's an American in Namibia, and he's been there since 96, if I remember correctly. And he arrived and fell in love and never went back. And he's a geologist, but he's also worked as a miner, various locations, and we'll soon learn about that. He's a merchant of incredible mineral specimens, and most important, he is a gem addict like me. And that's what it boils down to, folks. It's just two addicts living from one hit to the next. So Chris, welcome again, and please feel free to jump in and tell the audience about anything that I may have missed out in your introduction.
You're doing a fabulous job. Please carry on.
Okay, great. So now I want to begin, since you're here with us, Chris, I want to start the conversation, with, like, when I got in touch with you and told you about this book. Why did you say yes? Because it's not like we knew each other for some time. And what was some of the things that went through your head?
Well, look, you came with some impeccable references in that I got a heads up from my friend Brian Lees, who is the principal of Collector's Edge, and in my view, one of the most respected operators in the mineral specimen business in the world today. And Brian said, you should talk to this lady. And that's all I needed to hear, really. I mean, that if Brian said you're okay by me. And as for being in the book, we're talking to you about the book. I mean, I didn't know I was going to be in the book. that sort of evolved. I mean, it caught me by surprise. I thought, oh God, why does anybody want me in their book? And, as time went on, I mean, I guess I'm at a point now in my life. I'm 68 years old next month. I don't really have any children in the business. I don't have anybody to pass my business on to. And I have 28 years experience in Namibia in the gem business, in the gem mining business, in the mineral specimen business. And that is a wealth of knowledge that if I get hit by a bus tomorrow is gone. And so in a way, I feel obligated as much as possible to pass that knowledge on, to share the stories, to share the information. Maybe somebody gets something out of it. Maybe it's just entertaining. But essentially, my decision in this regard is to share the knowledge.
Right.
So.
Right. And I think that was where that was the genesis of this project, because I was commissioned in around July 2020, and the world was all locked up in, and this was it. It was about documenting through these stories some of the history of related to Africa for the last 50, 60 years. And because if we really think about it, most of the colored gemstones today come from the African continent. And a lot of those origins have only been discovered in the last couple of decades. So let's start with my birthstone, garnet, and you, because garnet is a special stone for you as well, because your story started with garnets. And I know it's a crazy story. We've kind of captured it in the book a little bit, but maybe you can share with us.
Well, the real story goes back a bit further. The first Referee Journal article I ever wrote was about star garnets from northern Idaho. And I've had an affinity for garnets for a really long time. And while I was still based in America, I got really active in applying very high-end cutting to the pyrope garnets from the Four Corners area in the southwestern United States. Absolute top calibration to really get the optics out of that material. And so, I mean, I don't know, I probably cut a couple 100,000 of those things. And then, I moved over here. But before I moved here, I was at the Pueblo Inn in Tucson. This would have been about, 91, 92, somewhere in there. And Peter Schnurla, who was then, I don't know if he was the senior vice president at Tiffany's or he was just the vice president in charge of acquisitions or the head buyer. He was important at Tiffany's in those days. He walked into my room and pulled this glowing orange thing out of his pocket. In a way, I mean, I can only describe it as an orange analog to kryptonite. And he said, well, what do you think about this? And I said, well, it looks to me like somebody got really stoned and cut a wolfenite from the Red Cloud mine. And he just laughed at me. He said, Chris, that's a garnet. And, I thought I knew a lot about garnets, but I'd never seen anything like it. And it turns out that this was a very early, very clean 10 plus carat piece from northern Namibia of what ultimately became arguably the finest spessartine ever found in the world. And, one thing led to another and conversations were had, and Tiffany's had entered into a preliminary agreement with the mine owners to buy all the production. And Tiffany's was looking for somebody sort of to take everything that they didn't want. And that's where Peter and my conversation took off. And, ultimately, Tiffany did not get involved with the spessartine, but I did. My first trips to Namibia, starting in 1993, one of the things I was actively involved in is working out an arrangement with the mine owners to cut and process and sell all the stuff that was under a gram. So basically finished weights under a carat plus.
Right.
And it was an amazing thing to go through. And almost all of that didn't sell to jewelers at the Tucson show ended up into the Japanese market.
Wow.
And as a result of doing that and being here 3-4 times a year for 3 years, I just completely fell in love with Namibia. And, you know, that's where the story in Namibia really got started.
And this was, correct me if I'm wrong, but this deposit was near the Kunene River. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. It's the Kunene River, and it's not near. You can pick up a rock and you can throw it and hit the river.
Okay.
There's 2 deposits. There's what was the original discovery, which is referred to locally as the old mine. And then there was one that was 30 kilometers south up what we call the Marienfluss, and that's known as the new mine. Slightly different colors between them, slightly different inclusion profiles, but both at their best exception.
And this was an alluvial deposit?
No.
No.
Hard rock. Hard rock.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's look, I mean it's in a metamorphic rock. It's a remobilization product, which means it got stretched and cooked and pressured, and out of that episode of Earth moving things around, it cooked up some garnets. It's virtually impossible to prospect for or drill for. You know, it's kind of complicated, but it is localized to the nose of plunging folds along Sigma 1, which, you know, is basically geology speak for you aren't going to find it.
Right. So and now, does this deposit still exist? Is it still being mined today?
Well, look, it's a metamorphic terrain and it's over a big area. Are there more garnets up there in the ground? Absolutely. I'm sure of it. But the ones that they discovered that produced all the garnets that came out of here in the 90s were at or very near the surface.
Mm.
And so they're mined out. So
Yeah.
the only way you're going to see any more from Namibia is if somebody stumbles on one of these little pockets at the nose of a plunging fold somewhere up there and mines it out. But you're not going to explore for it. You're not going to drill for it. You're not going to prospect for it. You'll never make any money doing that.
Right. And this is the thing, right? Because it's an example that I give often. When it comes to colored gemstones, you know, they're found in small pockets, and once those pockets are mined out, it's all over, folks. And the problem with the hard rock mining is the cost at the end of the day. And, you know, does the cost justify going deeper and deeper? And at some point, and especially with colored stones at this stage, it doesn't. Maybe a few decades down the road, garnets will be selling for the price that will make it worth it for someone to go in there and try and find more of them.
Listen, you know, I think it's really important for the listeners to understand the scale of distances in a place like Namibia. Now, look, on an African scale of 1 is the highway complexes around Cape Town, which are like any major city in the world,
Right.
and 10 is the middle of nowhere in the Central African Republic. Namibia, generally speaking, is about a 3 or a 4. But in the early 90s, to get to the place where the garnets were coming out, it, from where I live in Omaruru, was a 3-day drive.
Wow.
And so, a hard 3-day drive. And so you get up there with your equipment and your plant, your backhoe, your air compressor, your rock drills, everything you need to mine, and you blow an O-ring on a seal, and you don't have a replacement. And
What's an
the
O-ring
rainy-
on a seal? Hold on.
It's a part.
Okay.
You blow a part on your rig,
Okay.
and it's the rainy season. It could take you 2, maybe 3 weeks to get a replacement.
Wow.
So this is really remote, and as a result, that adds a layer of difficulty to operating, to maintaining infrastructure, to getting supply lines in place, and that's something that I don't think a lot of people, that don't really have any experience with this sort of thing, don't understand. Is sometimes you just can't get there from here.
Right. And I think you're the one who told me that there was, I forget where, but I think it was related to your Mile 72 project, where in that location is where paint companies come to test their paints, because the conditions are so bad that if a paint will survive in that locality, it'll survive anywhere else on the planet.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. The
stone though, right?
The Skeleton Coast of Namibia is one of the harshest marine environments, just in terms of equipment surviving. We were mining Yeremi-avite, which is a rare borate. It's in those days it was an exceedingly desirable mineral specimen. There were maybe 10 good examples on matrix known in the world, and so Brian Lees, who underwrote the project, and I was the guy running the mine, we went after it. And we, in order to protect our equipment, we would spray them. So pretty much everything mechanical got sprayed with a mix of dirty crankcase oil and diesel every night to try and slow down the rust.
Wow.
And it didn't work. Didn't work.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, all this talk of garnets is actually reminding me about another big story in the book, which is related to Campbell Bridges. And I think you know who I'm talking about. It was, and Campbell Bridges, of course, for those of the audience who may not know, Campbell Bridges is the gentleman who discovered a green grossular garnet, which became known as Savarite. And he discovered, well, the official discovery is, people say it's 1967, which was in Tanzania. But there's a crazy story about him. Actually, the first discovery was in 1961 in Zimbabwe, when he was out and about one weekend, he was exploring these hills, and he got chased by a buffalo, I think a Cape buffalo, and he jumped into a ravine to protect himself. And this is how the gem gods work. And he kept trying to dodge this buffalo, and he came across Savarite crystals, rough Savarite crystals. But then, he got transferred because he was working as a geologist at that time, and found these stones again in Tanzania. And then, because of political circumstances, he had to leave Tanzania, come to Kenya, and he traced the stones, Savarite, from Tanzania to the neighboring country of Kenya, and brought them to Tiffany and to Henry Platt. And Henry, when he asked him, what should we name this stone, because grossular green garnet is not a very romantic name, he said, well, yeah, in fact, his wife suggested Campbellite. And because it's customary, I think, and it's tradition for the person who discovers it, for the stone to be named after him. And so he said, no, that doesn't sound nice. Tsavo is, they were mining at Tsavo National Park, inside Tsavo National Park. And he said, and Kenya is my home. This is where I'm going to raise my family. And so he named it Tsavorite. And the thing that I love about garnet so much, and this is actually, I'm wearing a Tsavorite from his old collection, which I bought from his son, is that they're like the love child of a diamond and a colored stone, right? I mean, it is true. I mean, this could be the love child of a diamond and an emerald, right? Because it has the sparkle. It's part of the cubic crystal system, like a diamond. So it has the sparkle of, well, the dad, if you will, and it has the personality and the color of the mother. So, and I say this for spinels, of course, as well. But I don't know. And there's so many stories like this about Kenya. I mean, honestly, I could have written an entire book on Kenya and Tanzania just because of just it just has a very strong mining culture, and of course many deposits that have been discovered. So coming back to did you meet Campbell Bridges? Did you have the opportunity?
I met him in passing briefly. At that point in time, I still had spots, and he was a legend, and I said hello, and he said hello, and that was it. And beyond that, I really had no interaction with him, unfortunately. I want to go back to a comment you made about him finding the garnets in Tanzania and then again in Kenya.
Yeah.
One of the things about garnets, particularly metamorphic garnets, is that they tend to crop out over long distances because the geologic terrain in which they form is generally not on a small scale. It's on quite a large scale, and so that allows for occurrences when the circumstances are right within that terrain for you to start finding more occurrences of a specific type of garnet. That's exactly the way it is here in Namibia with the demontoids. Our andradite garnet, our chromium-rich andradite garnet here, it crops out over an area of about 90 kilometers.
Oh, wow.
So not the whole way, but
Okay.
in bits and pieces across that line of 90 kilometers, you can find garnets. So
Right.
that's probably what happened with Campbell.
Right. And speaking of garnets and demantoid, the Green Dragon mine, you know, when I was doing my GIA in colored stones, I read about the Green Dragon mine, the demantoid garnets from Namibia. And you, I mean, built that mine, right?
Yeah.
And you were running that show for the longest time, and from scratch, from inception. And the is it demantoid, or is it, how are you pronouncing it?
Demontoid. You know, I think this is English versus American English. It's essentially all the same. It's demontoid. And
Demantoid sounds grander. I'm going to try and say it that way. So the ones.
well, it is. It's a love child of something, so we should make it grander.
So the ones from Namibia don't have the horsetail inclusion, which the ones from Russia have, because it's one of the, I'm an inclusion lover. And, you know, I remember the first thing that my teacher taught me was demantoid garnets. You know, it has this horsetail inclusion, and it was always a delight to look for that when you would come across one at a show or somewhere. But the Namibians, the ones from Namibia don't have that. And I remember having this conversation with a gem merchant, and he was like, well, in my opinion, the ones from Namibia should not be called demantoid because they don't have the horsetail inclusion, and only the Russians are supposed to be carrying that name. What is your view on the subject?
Well, look, demontoid garnet is a varietal name of a chromium-rich andradite garnet. Full stop. The whatever inclusion set it has nothing to do with the crystal chemistry of the garnet. period. Not all Russian chromium-rich androdites or demontoid have horsetail inclusions.
Okay.
Not by a long shot. And so, look, in terms of the very best Russian demontoid garnets, in my view, are some of the best garnets in the world because they have Tsavorite color and diamond brilliance. And that makes them something really exceptional.
Right.
Now, the Namibian material at its very best is about a solid B minus Russian stone. The very best stones that we produced, you could drop them right into a tray of Russian stones that weren't the top quality in terms of color, and they would disappear in the tray. You wouldn't know it. They held their own. And so I find that the gem business, they come up with all these wacky names for things, and it's all about marketing, trying to create some sort of competitive advantage for their deposit or their company. And most of these names have absolutely no bearing in mineralogical nomenclature, which is where I come from when it comes to discussing names. So are the Namibian garnets demontoid? Absolutely. When they're their best. No question about it.
Why do you call them a B minus? Is it because of the color or is it the brilliance?
Because the color, look, the color from the best Russian, Tsavorite green and diamond brilliance. And Namibia's best ones don't get the Tsavorite green. They just don't get there.
It's not that electric color.
But because they don't have the horsetail inclusions, generally speaking, and particularly true in smaller stones, Namibia's demontoids have far, far better scintillation and brilliance than their Russian counterparts. Plus, they're available in quantity. Over the course of that project, I probably cut 300,000 stones, maybe a bit more.
Wow.
So, you don't get that many Russian pieces. So we were able to supply cut stones into the jewelry trade, and at a quality of cutting that, the Russians really couldn't match.
Right. And the thing, okay, so coming back to the book, now the stories that I'm sharing are not in the book. The book, actually, the story in the book, the talks about the lagoon tourmalines from Namibia, which are like, I always used to look, I'll be honest, I used to be a little snooty. I was this very
Don't call them lagoon. That's because it's not a real name.
Oh.
Sorry. It's a trade name.
I know. I like the name, but it just conjures up this image of this beautiful color.
Sure.
It's easy.
Sure. I understand that.
Right.
But if you're speaking about the very finest, open color, blue with a slight hint of green tourmalines that come from Namibia, again, I would argue that, if Paraiba or Cuprian elbites from Mozambique and Nigeria had never been found, Namibia's very best tourmaline is, in my opinion, the best in the world. Period.
From my personal experience, I used to always look down a little bit on tourmalines. I would be like, oh, no, I'm not interested in a tourmaline. No. And then I came across this spectacular stone. Yeah, I said I used to look down upon them. And I came across this stone and I'm like, what is that? Come to mama. And it was a tourmaline from Namibia. And it just blew me away. And I was like, I don't know what the stone is, but I really, really like it. And and that's when I kind of got interested in tourmalines. Not because of the rate.
Namibia, one of the things that's always been a bit of a problem with Namibian gem production. When you talk about Brazilian tourmaline mines and tourmaline pockets and production, those guys hit a pocket. It's 5 kilos, 10 kilos, 20 kilos, 100 kilos. I mean, they're big pockets. And so, Namibian gem deposits, particularly ones that are in pegmatites, which is where tourmalines form, there's some of the richest, highest purity mineral occurrences in pegmatites, and yet they're never very big. And so it's a complete outlier in Namibian tourmaline production to get a pocket that's, say, 10 kilos. I mean, that's enormous. And so, frequently a pocket in one of the tourmaline mines here is 500 grams, and they're happy with it, or a kilo. And so one of the issues that's happened with Namibian tourmaline in terms of consumer awareness or the trade's awareness is that prior to 96, 94, 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there, all of the Namibian tourmaline went to Idar Oberstein.
Right.
And there, the specifics of its locality disappeared.
Right.
It just simply became known as African tourmaline.
Right.
And again, they were protecting their interests, and I understand that. I'm not condemning them for it. But after that, people started to become aware of it because of what an occurrence that happened in Tucson in 96, 97, where for the first time, the American market got a chance to see Namibian tourmaline in quantity and at its finest, and it set some ripples through the industry because up until that time, they had no idea where it was from.
And that story is in the book. And
what book?
What book? What do you mean, what book? Our book, my book. No,
You
but
told me not to talk about it. I'm sorry.
no, it's fine. It's fine. We got to give people a sneak peek. We promised a sneak peek, so this is a sneak peek. But it's a crazy story, and yes, you have to get the book when it comes out, hopefully May next year, to learn about Chris and his crazy adventures with Namibian tourmalines, which involve all sorts of creatures and all sorts of harrowing escapades.
Look, I mean, I think anybody who is in either the mineral specimen mining business or the
Right.
gem mining business,
Right.
I don't care where they're doing it.
Yeah.
It's a hard life.
Yes.
Generally speaking, you do not do it because you have this expectation that you're going to get rich. You're doing it. In my case, it was a function of every time I was digging something anywhere, I took a huge sense of satisfaction in knowing that I was the first guy to hold that thing in my hand. And wherever it went down through time, from that point forward, I was the first guy to see it. And that, I mean, I guess that was a big shot to my ego. But I mean, I don't care where you're mining in America or South America or Africa.
Right.
You got to put your big boy pants on because it's not easy.
Well, speaking of big boys, another big boy whose story is in this book is, interestingly, an Indian gentleman which not many people would have heard about, called Shiv Shankar Gupta. And the reason why, and this is the thing, like through the course of discovering these stories and doing the research that I was doing for the last 2.5 years, and some of which I'm still doing, what was interesting for me to learn was how gemstones were found in Africa. It was almost in waves. There was this first wave that happened around the late 1800s, early 1900s, during the colonial period. And that's, of course, when diamonds were discovered in South Africa in the late 1800s. And then after that, as these countries started getting independence, you had people coming in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. And when these rediscoveries were happening using colonial maps, because European prospectors and explorers had documented a lot of these deposits which had been forgotten. And coming back to Shiv Shankar Gupta, it's unusual to come across someone of Indian origin mining in Africa. I mean, this guy was India got its independence from the British in 1947, 1947, 1946, 1946, 1947. In the 50s, he lands in Colombia. He's buying Colombian emeralds in the 50s. He comes to Brazil in the 60s. Early 70s, he owns the world's probably the world's largest emerald mine in South Africa, the Gravelot Emerald Mine. And he's Indian. And Indians are not permitted in South Africa at that time, right? Because it's under.
Well, sorry, let me interrupt you. There were three categories, classifications of people in South Africa in those times. There were black people, there were colored people, and there were white people. Mr. Gupta would have qualified as a colored person.
Yeah.
That's their nomenclature. Please don't give me a bad time out about it. That's the terminology that was used then.
Yeah.
And Mr. Gupta was able to move around, and I suspect he did so quietly, not to draw a lot of attention to himself, because had he done that, it would have been quite dangerous.
No, and the story actually opens with the scene where he arrives in, and now I'm giving a real sneak peek and revealing a little bit about the story, but he arrives in Johannesburg, and he would normally land in Johannesburg and take a private plane straight to the mine because they had a landing strip at the mine, but there was something wrong with the plane, so they had to drive from the international airport to the mine, like 4 or 5 hour drive. And along the way, and the driver was a white guy, and along the way they stopped for lunch, and the guy gets out and he's like, okay, I'm gonna get you what you need to the car, because there was a signboard outside the restaurant which said no black and colored people are allowed inside. And this driver who worked for Shiv Shankar Gupta went in, got his lunch, brought it to the car. He had it in the car and he was like, yes, sir, now we can go. But this is and the thing is that, of course, I know this at some point, right? I know the history. But when you come across anecdotes, personal stories like this, it just you're like, whoa, okay, it just adds this dimension and this color to that history. Makes it,
he's a huge character, huh? I mean, he's one of the legends.
Yeah.
Because I mean, again, please don't, whoever's listening to this, please don't take this wrong. In those days, in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, the gem business, the colored gem business, it was generally speaking people of color who were digging them up.
Yeah.
And then there would be white dealers, European dealers, rarely American dealers, primarily guys from EDAR, who would arrive at these remote mining sites with a bag full of money, and they would buy the production. Yeah. And off they would go back to EDAR or wherever else it was, process it, and then take it into the trade. So it was quite a clearly demarcated transition from people of color to white people. Sorry to use the term, but and then Mr. Gupta climbs into the middle of this, and not only does he survive it,
yes,
but he turns out to be a giant. And I mean, it's a really incredible story.
So the incredible part, for me, and this was like such an honor, and I mean, I feel like closing my eyes and thanking the gem gods. I interviewed him in 2020. My last interview with him was November 2020, and he was 95 years old, and he passed away in March 2021. right? And then I was able to connect with his son, Govind Gupta, who then helped me complete the story and fill in the bits that I hadn't gotten. And but it was, I mean, it was just incredible because not just because of what he did with Gravelot in South Africa, but the fact that he then went on to establish Kajin in Zambia. He was invited by the Zambian government, who just had lost control of the emerald deposit up north, and he was invited to come and form a partnership, a joint venture partnership with the Zambian government, which, I mean, he established the Kajum Emerald Mine in 1983, and which is today owned by Gemfields and is today considered the largest emerald mine in the world. And so it's interesting how stories are also connected, through time, and how as large as an industry as it seems to be, when you actually start digging into these stories, you realize, oh my gosh, and this guy was actually, who was in story 1, was also in story 4, because in this year he was doing this, and with another part of his life he was doing that, and it's all connected in that sense.
Well, listen, look, if you take the jewelry trade, and it's a pyramid, right?
Right.
And, there are however many millions of people who make their living working in jewelry stores or as bench jewelers or in the trade, directly connected to the retail end of the market. And the higher up you go, or in another way to look at it, the closer to the hole in the ground you get, the smaller the number of people that are involved. And so when you get to a certain level of time and history and effort in either a country or a species, the club becomes quite small. There are not a lot of people in that club. For example, in terms of the guys that really understand and know Namibian tourmaline, the historical deposits and what came out of what mine, and can look at it and tell you that, I don't know, maybe 20 people in the world, maybe.
Right.
And, and I'm sure it's, I don't, what I know about emeralds, I can hold in my little hand and have lots of, I don't know anything about emeralds, but I know about tourmaline, and I'm sure that it's exactly the same in emeralds or sapphires or any of these products, that once you get to a certain level, and the stories, like you say, are all connected by common threads of people and circumstances through time.
Yeah. And just, I want to make a point about Idar, and then I want to talk about tourmalines again and Mozambique. And the reason why Idar is at the heart of all of this is because for a few hundred years, they used to mine what?
500 years.
500 years. Thank you.
Mm.
For 500 years, they were mining and cutting in Idar. And when they started running out of rough, or when it became too difficult and too expensive to get the rough that they needed, Brazil was one of the first places. And then after Brazil and South America, then Africa. And it's the same thing with Sri Lanka and Madagascar, right? You see, you look at Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka has always been a source of sapphires and colored gemstones, and also a cutting center now. And while there's still stuff coming out of the ground, let's be real, not in huge quantities as it used to be a few hundred years ago. And with the discoveries in Madagascar, Sri Lankans, are in the fabric, are integrated into the fabric in Madagascar now, and sourcing sapphires from Madagascar, which they bring to Sri Lanka, cut in Sri Lanka. Some of them sold as Sri Lankan sapphires as well.
They sprinkle some fairy dust on them and they become Sri Lankan.
Well, oh gosh, we're either going to be in a lot of trouble after this recording, or I don't know.
Oh, come on. People need to have a sense of humor. Come on, really.
I don't know. Anyway, I was going to say something about the book, but I'm not going to say it.
No, don't say any more about the book.
I won't say
But
anything.
you wanted to ask me about Mozambique.
Yes, you've been to Mozambique. Let's
I
talk
worked in
about
Mozambique.
Sorry?
I worked there for almost 6 years.
Yeah. And the chap that you, I think, were connected with, his story, we're not going to take his name, is also in the book. But tell us more about Mozambique tourmalines and your experiences there.
Look, interesting thing about, geologically speaking, about tourmaline in Mozambique versus tourmaline, say, in Namibia. As I mentioned earlier, Namibian tourmaline is in pegmatites.
Right.
And because we're a desert country, I mean, there are places in this country that don't get any rain in a year, and average where I live is 10 inches. And so it's dry. And one of the results of living in a very dry, arid climate is rock tends to be very stable and not decompose.
Right.
And so when it comes to mining tourmaline pegmatites in Namibia, you need rock drills and you need explosives and you need heavy equipment. You go across the continent to Mozambique, first off, their pegmatites are an order of magnitude bigger than ours. And because of the climate, it's been wet and humid and, if you will, jungle-like for millennium, maybe millions of years. Their pegmatites are weathered deep. And so one of the major components in a pegmatite is feldspar. And when feldspar weathers, it turns into clay. And when it's really pure, people in England and places like that in China make porcelain out of it. But
Right.
one of the beautiful things about a pegmatite that's been weathered and the clay is what's left of the granite, you can mine it with a hose. You just turn a hose on it. Or you can just dig it with a shovel and run it through a screen and run the screen over the screen with water. It's much, much easier to mine pegmatites in Mozambique because they're weathered. And as a result, their production is much greater.
Right. And when was the first time you were where you went to Mozambique and saw these tourmalines?
I'm an old guy. Time. I'd have to look at my passport to confirm, but I want to say it was 2015, 2014.
Okay.
So relatively recent.
Yeah. And so the thing with tourmalines from Mozambique, and we're talking about Paraiba-like tourmalines, neonish Paraiba-like tourmalines. What was interesting for me to discover, and it was interesting to find out and realize that a lot of people in the industry didn't know this, that a couple of years ago, the Lab Harmonization Committee, which is like this committee made of all the top gem labs, and they actually said that because of the copper content in tourmalines from Mozambique, they can be called Paraiba tourmaline, right? And Paraiba, of course, as we know, is this place in Brazil, is the location in Brazil where tourmalines of this nature were originally found. However, Paraiba is not the only place in Brazil where these tourmalines were found. They were found in other states in Brazil as well. Why is it that now I'm bringing this back to Namibia? From the way you explain, it sounds as if the tourmalines from Namibia are significantly more rare than the ones in Brazil because they are found in smaller pockets, right? The rarity factor is more. And so why is it? And in GIA, when we're talking about value, it's beauty, durability, rarity. Those are the three pillars that we learn. Uh, why is it then that the African origin label is not, why are Namibian tourmalines not more expensive than Brazil if they are more rare?
Let me address the elephant in the room. I strenuously object to any tourmaline that's not from Paraíba in Brazil being called Paraíba. That's my own personal thing.
Okay.
In my view, mineralogically, it's not correct. Let the gemologists lose their mind over that. That's okay. The thing about Namibian tourmaline, and I tested them, and I tested lots of them. We took the very best ones that we had that were, window cleaner blue,
Yes.
or the analog, the window cleaner green, and we tested them for copper, and there was no copper. So
Right.
we were never able to call them Cuprian elbites or, Paraíba-like tourmaline.
Right.
So the industry got a hold of it, and the Paraíba, and created this mystique around the material, and it drove the values up. And I have to say, my time in this business is I was there in Tucson in the early years when these Brazilian ones started coming out, and they absolutely blew my mind. I could not believe that they were real.
Right.
You'd see them, and you could see them from 30, 40 meters away. They were just this crazy blue, blue. And, there had never been anything like it. And to my mind, there's never been anything like it. I don't care what Nigeria or Mozambique are producing.
But the thing is that I saw a tourmaline in Singapore, and it's actually not heated. And so because it's not heated, it hasn't reached that Paraíba neon Windex color. But I loved it. Like, just look at this. I don't know if you can see this.
That's a crazy good color. I don't care what you call that. That's a crazy good tourmaline. And somebody who buys that should be prepared to get their checkbook out, and they better have a whopping big balance. Because that by any definition is a gem. It really is. Diamonds by comparison are road gravel compared to that thing. It's, and this is what gets me wound up with colored gemstones. At their best.
Paraíba color. This is a heated Paraíba color.
The first one's better.
I love the first one.
The first one you showed me is better.
Yeah. It has it looks more natural for some reason.
I'd have to have this conversation with Brian Cook, because I don't remember anymore. And he was there. He's an American guy that was in Paraíba in the early days of this. Under correction, and maybe somebody in this audience can clarify this for me. Under correction, I'm pretty sure that some of the very early Brazilian Paraíbas didn't need to be heated. They were that crazy Windex blue right out of the ground.
Yes. No, not every Paraíba tourmaline is heated. Most are, but there are, at least I've seen a few that are not heated. But
from the early days.
Old stock. So we've been yakety for an hour now almost, and I feel like we should wrap it up, because I don't know. I'm happy to go on. You know me. I can keep talking for hours.
I just wonder if the 2.5 people have run out of popcorn that are watching this thing, and they're walking the dog.
This is a pre-recording, so someone will see it later.
Look, one thing I'd like to say.
Yeah.
To old guys that are out there, share your knowledge.
Yes.
Share it.
Yeah.
Because it's not going with you. I had a very, very, very dear friend who passed away not too long ago. And that guy had forgotten more about gems and minerals than I will ever learn. There's no question in my mind. And he's a legend in this industry, and I'm not going to name him.
Right.
But towards the end of his life, his mental facilities they slid, and so he had this head full of knowledge,
right,
and sadly most of it is gone. And so to the old guys out there and old women, sorry, share your knowledge, share it with the younger generation, because in doing so, one of the things you do is light the fire.
yes,
And to the young people, be respectful of the old guys, because most of them, they've earned their wrinkles in their gray hair, because we started doing this business, there weren't smartphones, and it wasn't easy to get around, and it was much more difficult to go out and to get materials and to bring them back to the trade. And don't ever lose, if you're interested in doing what I did, don't hesitate, go for it, because there are still lots and lots and lots of really good rocks in the ground to be found and brought to market.
Excellent. And last note before we end this broadcast, the book with no name right now, it's like Prince, right? It doesn't have a name right now. The book is gonna be out end of April, early May. Both of us, Chris and I, we both have Instagram accounts. Find us on Instagram. What is your Insta called, Chris?
I'm really creative. I am Namibian Minerals for Sale.
In case you didn't get the message. And mine is just my name, Richa Goel Sikri. And my objective with this book is 3 objectives. 1, to document some of this history related to colored gemstones from Africa. And secondly, even someone who doesn't know that emeralds are green or rubies are red should be able to pick this book up, fall in love with the characters, with the land, with the stones, and be entertained, but also be educated and take away something from every single story, where they feel that, okay, I understand this now. So in that sense, it's been a joy to write this book and to have this commission from Gemfields, because it allowed me to learn so much about geology and gemology, to take complicated geological concepts. And people like Chris spend hours in, it's like geology for dummies, me being the dummy, taking that complicated concept and then translating it and distilling it and putting it in the story in a way that someone without any background would be able to understand. And I hope I've been successful. Time will tell. But thank you.
I have to say, I'm deeply honored, somewhat bemused, and still really, shaking my head that I've ended up in this book. I mean, it's, it is, I get weepy about this, but it is an affirmation of an interesting life well lived. And I'm profoundly honored to have been included in a group of people whom I have an immense amount of respect for.
Oh, you're gonna make me sentimental now. No, but for me, I think for me, it's like the gem gods were ridiculously kind. And so buy the book when it comes out, everybody.
Yeah, buy the book.
Buy the book. Because I think 50% of the royalty has already been pledged to charitable projects in Africa for the book. So
excellent.
Thank you, Chris. And I look forward to flying over to Namibia and shaking your hand at some point.
I'll keep a light on for you all the time.
Please do. Take care, everyone. Thanks for watching.
Thanks. Bye.